Let's get started with this. Say again? Wait for her thumbs up.
I think we're live. Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to call to order this work session for Salem City Council for January 21st, 2025. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Tigan.
Present.
Councillor Nishioka.
Here.
Councillor Matthews.
Here.
Councillor Gwen.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Nordike.
Here.
Councillor Varney.
Here.
Mayor Julie Hoy.
Here. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councillor Nishioka, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the special meeting agenda.
Second.
Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Matthews.
Aye.
Councillor Gwen.
Aye.
Councillor Brown.
Aye.
Councillor Nordike. Aye. Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Tigan.
Aye.
Mayor Julie Hoy.
Aye. Councillor Nishioka, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
There are none tonight.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're here to discuss a very important item. The outpouring of support has been impressive, and thank you to everybody who's come tonight. I'm really looking forward to the presentation. So, Josh, is it you? Or City Manager first? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council, community members, city staff. We do have a presentation this evening. We're going to run through that, but we're looking forward to a conversation with you about next steps in this process. So, if you'll recall, 5 months ago, August 19th, 2024, I stood down there at a podium and talk to you about next steps in our journey towards, potentially towards a levy. And here we are this evening. I said then that we had hard work and hard questions ahead of us. We've done some of that hard work. We surveyed our community and started to work to develop an understanding of the need and the support for the measure in the community. There's a coalition of community groups that have come together to support a Parks Center 50 and library measure should you decide to move forward. We convened a forecast review team to assist in the 5-year forecast validation. We kicked off a performance audit process with a team from Moss Adams, and just today we met with the Finance Committee to establish a efficiency review committee to provide an outside perspective on the city's operations. The hard questions that we need to address this evening are we going to move forward with levy on May 20th? We really need an answer to that question this evening. What will the rate be? Dan will need to include that in the ballot language, and what will the services be that will be covered? Next slide. Thank you. So we have made substantial cuts to our 2024 and 2025 budgets totaling over $5 million. Even these relatively measured cuts were challenging to make. You'll recall the struggles that we had, and in fact we ended up putting $1 million back into the budget to save some what were considered essential services. The $14 million in cuts that we're going to be talking about this evening, necessary to balance the 2026 budget, will be far more challenging. We have already started to work on that budget. Callie Leinbach, our budget manager, sent out the 2026 budget instructions just this afternoon at like 3:59. So we are literally off and running with that. Next slide. Thank you. You'll recall that the Revenue Task Force met from January of 2024 to July of 2024. They prepared recommendations for your consideration to close our budget gap. While a levy would certainly be impactful, I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking that if we pass a levy, all of our budget problems will be resolved. They will be better and they will be more manageable, but they will not be resolved. We are actively pursuing a payment in lieu of taxes. A bill was filed and our lobbyist continues to work on that. And as we engage with our local legislative delegation, we continue to press that issue with them and with the governor's office and others. I hope that before the end of the legislative session in June, we will have secured some sort of permanent funding measure resulting in an annual payment of millions of dollars per year. That certainly would go a long ways towards funding our gap. These funds would directly support our public safety providers. I anticipate proposing a solid waste franchise fee to support our SOS team. That's the team that does outreach in the community to remove debris and trash and garbage left by people living outdoors. I anticipate considering amendments to our operations fee to generate additional revenue to support public safety operations or other general fund uses. I believe that there may be additional revenue available to us through EMS dispatch charges and charging for fire emergency response services. Further out in 27 and 28, we will see additional general fund revenue from 2 urban renewal areas that will be closing. Lastly, our newly established EMS transport function may create revenue stream that can help support fire emergency response. With the levy and some combination of these funds and strategic reductions, we will be able to continue to provide our current services, and we may even be able to find a way to enhance them. Slide 4. So you're familiar with the polling that we did in September. We did a statistically valid poll of our community, and that poll told us that there's not a lot of support for additional levies or other funding measures in our community. Our community has told us, though, very clearly in that poll that their priority is public safety. The budget that I will put forward will recognize that perspective. Police and fire services are frankly too important to fund with a levy. There's too much chance involved in that. While there may be greater support for public safety, it was still far below what is needed to pass. To pass a levy, we will need a concerted and focused effort to educate our community about the needs and the benefits. Next slide. Thanks, Josh. As we saw with the city of Gresham, and we talked about that on August 19th, their survey results told them that their measure was going to fail. They surveyed their community in February of 2024, and their results said that they had about 42% positive at that point in time. They decided to go forward despite these daunting numbers, and their council, their community, their boards and commissions, and their labor groups came together and moved the needle. It went from failing in February in the 40s to passing in May and passed by 54%. It's 3 months. We've got 4 months, 4.5 months. So while there is much work to do, I think that we can do the same here for a Parks, Center 50, and Library levy. So Josh will take it from here.
Thank you, Keith. Just 1 second. Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. Josh Eggleston, I'm the Chief Financial Officer with the city. And I have some information for you, some of which you've seen before, some of which is new. Sorry about that. It jumped to the end. Where does the local option levy idea come from? Keith outlined the Revenue Task Force information. It was a key recommendation, and the Budget Committee also made a recommendation to the City Council for more information. And then in November, City Council directed staff to bring back a scenario for the local option property tax levy to fund the library, parks, and Center 50 Plus. Just to be clear about what it is, a local option levy, voter approval is required. It's a temporary property tax, which typically lasts to 5 years. Generally used to fund specific services like parks and libraries, and it's available to other governments and taxing districts for things like schools, transit, and other day-to-day operations. On this slide, you can see the rate per thousand, and I apologize for the many numbers listed on this slide. I got a lot of questions with lots of ranges of levies that might be possible. On here, you see 45 cents per thousand up to $1.15 per thousand. And then on the right is the annual household impact for the average residential property in Salem. And then from fiscal year 2026 through 2030, you see the estimated revenue generated by each of the levy amounts. For what services could a levy cover? This slide will look a little differently. We're talking about the total estimated cost of services. I recognize there was a little confusion about program revenues. So just to be really clear, the number listed under each service is the total budget for each item, and then the program revenues are listed in red, reducing that amount to that $15.1 million. So you can really see the net impact of each of those services. Also, you can see how some services are pretty heavily leveraged with program revenue and donations. For a specific levy scenario, certainly council has discretion about what scenario they could go forward with. In this case, I modeled a 98 cents per thousand, funding the library, library hour restoration, parks maintenance, recreation, and Center 50 Plus. So you see that 98 cents per thousand for this levy revenue total, ranging from 14 million to 16.6 for fiscal year 2030. You see that total service cost, that 15.1 from the previous slide, increasing, or we're projecting costs to go up over the next several years, up to 18 million. And the difference there at the bottom, so at 98 cents, it doesn't fully cover the funding for these services. If you wanted to fully fund these specific services, it would be about $1.10 levy rate. So the difference would simply be absorbed by the general fund. It'd be a continued obligation. And I'm going to turn it over briefly to Scott Archer to talk specifically about the library enhancement.
Thanks, Josh. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. Just a few slides here in the middle of Josh's presentation. We're going to come back to him to kind of finish the conversation about the the financial part of this. But as Josh just explained, if we were looking at 98 cents, that would include an enhancement to the library. The 98 cents also includes essentially holding steady the services and all the programming that we provide at Center 50 and through our Parks and Recreation. So we're talking about essentially maintaining those services and then enhancing library services at this particular rate as you consider that. So a little bit of context about the library quickly. A typical day at the library, kind of a snapshot, if you will. We check out over 4,000 items a day. We have over 1,400 people visit us every day. We answer over 300 questions. We have lots of use of our meeting rooms and our study rooms for public use, computer sessions, lots of Wi-Fi use and sessions, an average of about 3 programs per day. And then at the very bottom there, we're adding in, we're acknowledging the amount of volunteerism that we have at the library. We have substantial use of volunteers. We're well supported with the volunteers that come from our community. Our average over the last year is we incorporate about 115 volunteer hours per week, which is significant. And this doesn't look like the right slide. Okay. This is not the slide we were looking for. Here we go. All right. So the library, this is a graphic just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what we do besides just check out books and materials. So the library is much more than just a place to come and get your materials and go home. We are a comprehensive program and facility. We provide lifelong learning, resources and experiences, reference and research help, community programs and events, and we are a safe and inclusive space. And under each of those 5 areas are a number of subheadings, and I will not read through those, but you can refer to those. But just to give you an idea that while we're open, the number of hours that we are, and certainly people come and utilize the building as a place, and they check out their materials, but they really, the community really counts on us and participates in all of these different services that we provide. So here's some information about our hours. Our current weekly hours at the main library branch, just adjacent to us here in the Civic Center, prior to 2021, we were operating at about 53 hours a week for the most part over the 20 years prior to that. There were some variances to that, but for the most part, 53 hours was kind of a number per week that we were operating for our community. 2021, we were closed because we did the renovations. We also were closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 22, when we reopened, we were open at 45 hours a week. And then last year in 2024, as you recall, we made reductions, and we are now running the library, the main library, at 38 hours a week. Our West Salem branch, prior to 24, we were running that branch at about 25 hours a week. As of now, again with the reductions last year, we're running at 10 hours per week at West Salem. And so this is just a comparative staffing chart, just to give you some understanding of how we're staffed and how that compares with some of our peer libraries in the state that have somewhat similar population bases that they serve. So these numbers are, the ratios are a per 1,000 population, staffing to population by 1,000. So Eugene at the top of that is staffed at a 0.58 per 1,000 ratio, and at the kind of going down the list, it goes down, and we are at the bottom of that list at 0.22 per 1,000 staffing. That's at 39.5. That's our FTE. These do not include seasonal and part-time staffing. Those types of staff are utilized to fill in and support, but these are our full-time or our professional part-time staff, if you will. So as you can see in comparison with our 39.5 staff, and that's our main library plus our West Salem staffing. We've listed out each of those scenarios at the other comparative libraries. So some of those peer libraries have they have a main library, of course, and then some have multiple branches, one or more. Deschutes County has 6 branches, as you can see there, and so that staffing includes all of the staffing it requires to run those. And so we're at 0.22 per 1,000. At our current level, our 39.5 staff covers all of our hours at the main library and at West Salem. That's a total of 48 hours per week between the two. The enhanced level, if you will, that we're talking about with the 98-cent example of the levy, we are projecting that it would require us to increase our staffing to 55. Now, I want to mention that that is not all full-time. We would propose to utilize part-time staffing as best we are able. So these are not full-time, but these are the staff numbers. It would be 55 staff, and we would increase our main library hours to 53 hours per week, and our West Salem hours to 25 hours per week. And within those hours, we would be adding days as well as evening times, particularly at our main library branch, which I know we've heard a lot from our community that people are interested in restoring our evening hours. So we would be doing that multiple nights per week. I think that's it. Is it not? Yes. So I'm going to turn it back to Josh, and of course, we're going to be happy to answer any questions about this information when we're done here.
Just a little bit more on the financial impact. So the local option levy would shift the cost from the general fund to levy funds. As City Manager Staley mentioned, the levy does not fully eliminate the general fund deficit. I apologize, it jumped to the end again. All of you might remember on January 15th, we delivered this forecast to the Budget Committee. You'll recognize in 2026 the fiscal year impact or deficit of $13.8 million. Just to remind everyone, the original forecast we delivered in October was 17.7. Through the forecast review team and new information, additional revenue, operational changes, that was reduced to 13.8. More optimistic savings was the largest portion. So for the local option levy, you can break it down into two categories in this case: additional revenue that could fund general fund services and additional expense. So the library restoration we just spoke about does come with a cost. So you see the additional potential local option revenue, 14 million to 16.6 at that 98 cents. And you see the library restoration enhancement at 1.2 to 1.35. And then that fiscal year impact, so just jumping back 13.8 down to $1 million for fiscal year 2026, increasing to 8.83 in fiscal year 2030 with the current forecast and all the assumptions. Still quite a bit better than 24 million, still a giant portion of revenue. And we would be remiss, City Manager Staley mentioned some of these, but other revenue and savings potential on the horizon that are not included in the forecast. We mentioned the operations fee restructure, the urban and rural areas returning tax base to the general fund, the franchise fee increases, a potential capital district or payment in lieu of taxes, other service cost recovery. We're exploring some other options for fire service. And then also the Budget Efficiency Committee. The Finance Committee met earlier this afternoon and approved members for that Efficiency Committee, and they'll begin meeting next week, 9 community members. So through all those options, all those potential revenues or savings are the tools we have to balance the rest of the budget problem. So that 1 million to 9 million for fiscal year 2026 to 2030. Those are the options to address that continued deficit. Election timing and costs. So February 28th is the deadline to refer a ballot to the counties. We would have a deadline of February 24th. That's your second council meeting in February. And then March 20th is a deadline to file or withdraw the measure. And then estimated election cost of $35,000 for the election. And I want to stress this is truly an estimate in collaboration with Polk and Marion counties. With the current other measures they foresee on the ballot, the current estimate is $35,000. But if some of those measures don't happen, this cost could go up. If additional measures are put on the May ballot, it could go down slightly. But it is the current estimate. And the next steps, if approved, we're looking for general consensus on the timing, the rate, and the services, and then staff will draft ballot language for council consideration, and then you'll be asked to refer a resolution to the election, to the county. And we're happy to address any questions you might have.
Yes, Counselor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So, Mr. CFO, so I have a few questions, but I'll just give one for now. So you said that the 98%, that would not fund us completely, correct?
That is correct. So 98 cents per thousand would not fully fund the services. So on this slide at the bottom, you can see that difference of 1.1 million to 1.5 million in fiscal year 2030.
Okay, so if it doesn't fund us, and I think Mr. Archer went to $1.10 would fully fund.
That is correct. Simply looking at the chart that's provided, the levy rate that would fully address all those services is $1.10.
And we're proposing the 98 cent and not the $1.10?
It's one scenario for your consideration. Of course, council has purview to select whatever scenario you might for the ballot, so you could select a different rate. Staff, we were trying to keep it under $1.
But if we went to the extra 10 cent, we would have it fully funded.
For those services, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And one final question before I pass it on to my peers. The amount of hours, currently right now, we're at 38 hours?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we're at 38 hours, and a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, we did that tour, right? And we had 39.5 FTE. If it's fully funded at $1.10, would that turn around and take us to where we would have more staff? So when it comes to the operation costs, are we also going to pay additional staff out of this levy, or would that come out of the general fund?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I might defer to Deputy City Manager Archer for part of it. I will note that the service restoration going from the 38 hours to 53 hours and the 10 hours to 25 hours is listed here under library service restoration enhancement. So that 1.2 million to 1.35 million in fiscal year 2030 is what gets you to those higher hour amounts.
With more FTE?
Correct.
Do we know how many more?
So there toward the bottom, you see the staffing at 39.5 going to 55 staff for the enhanced level.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Matthews.
So on the levy scenario that you put on there, the rate of 0.98 cents, with the total service cost out there, does that actually include the enhancement of service when we're looking at that total service cost, or is that our current total service cost?
That is correct. It does include the enhancement, so it ties out to this slide, including all the program revenue, that 15.1 million.
Okay.
I want to go back to something, Madam Mayor.
One moment,
Go ahead.
Dr. Brown. Yeah, go ahead, Counselor Nishioka.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So when we saw the slide number 8, and it showed it at 98 cents, that we'd have a difference or a deficit of $1 million in 26, 1.3 in 27, goes up to, it continues to go up. And you made the comment, the continued obligation would come from the general funds. So the general funds would have to pick up the promise of the levy, and that would mean the general funds would be then at a loss of the million or up to 1.5 million. But we would have to continue the promise of the levy.
I might defer to the city attorney on the specifics to that, but I think to boil it down, just the financial piece, you're really coming back to, you're adding $14 million of revenue to the general fund, and you have an increased cost, that 1.2 million. So yes, there's a continuing obligation of the general fund that's already included in the forecast and the budget.
Yes, Dr. Brown, did you have a question?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So CFO, another question. So if we no longer are going to touch the general fund and we basically get that 14 million back, does that leave PD and FD alone completely? Or will we have to come back and make cuts there too?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think it really comes back to this general fund forecast slide where it has the local option levy included. And then this slide, the other revenue and savings potential. So this deficit scenario continues current services for all other departments at the current level, current staffing. With that being said, there's still a deficit of that $1 million up to $9 million for fiscal year 30. We still have to address that deficit amount. The levy addresses a large piece of it, but through these other options or potential reductions, we'd have to address the balance.
So in essence, even, let's say we move forward, optimistically speaking, let's say we're at $1.10, and let's say the voters like that. It's still not a clean cut dry of leaving FD and PD alone, correct?
So potentially you could. So if you did the $1.10, that's a little bit more revenue for the general fund or these services. And then through these other revenue and savings potential, you probably could address the balance of the deficit. It just depends how it plays out. And a lot of these require council action. So it'd be council having to go forward and adopt a franchise fee or look at those other service cost recovery options.
Yeah, I think I would be interested in hearing from the rest of us, the 98 cent versus the $1.10.
Councillor Brown, before we do that, could we move to Councillor Tigan's question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And maybe this is directed at the city attorney, and it's to Councilor Nishioka's question. When we put something like this on the ballot under a levy, and we say it's going to cover a certain amount of services, I think Councilor Nishioka's question, or my question about it is, what's the obligation we're making to the voters at that point about what they're supporting? And maybe another way to ask is the revenue from the levy put into something other than the general fund in order for us to fund those options, to fund those services?
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So it's a bit of a nuanced answer. First, you don't have to put it in a special trust and agency account. Some jurisdictions will do that just to show transparency. And so in one way you could do that, you could establish a special account and say that 13 million, 14 million, whatever the income is going to be here, and it's going to go directly to the services that the ballot measure says it's going to go to. So under the Constitution and under election law, the city is legally bound by what's in that ballot title. So if it says, it'll raise revenue at 98 cents per thousand and it'll be used to fund library services, we have to do that. We have to use all that revenue for library services. Now, as far as the enhancements go, we can't tell. We can forecast as best we can, but we're going to generate a certain amount of money to fund these services. In 2 years, and 3 years, and 5 years, it might not be enough because of factors outside of our control. We're not going to be obligated to take more money from the general fund to fund those services legally. We'll just have to use the money that's being generated from the levy to do that. That said, council is, by referring this out to voters, is making a commitment to the voters saying we are going to restore services and hours to the library back to the previous levels. And if that were to drop below that level, you're going to have a conversation with the community about that.
Dr. Brown, to your question?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just curious because I want to hear from my colleagues their thoughts of the 98 cent versus the $1.10. Don't everybody speak at the same time?
Thanks for asking, Dr. Brown. I think we should ask ourselves, if we're going to go through the process of engaging the public, asking for their support, why we would do it in a measure that doesn't restore the services that people have asked. And I think the comments that we've received so far on this question ask for that restoration of services. So I'm inclined to, as a starting position, discuss a higher rate than 98 cents. I say this only half jokingly. I don't think we should put anything on the ballot with the numbers 110 on it. And other than that, I'd be interested in discussing that higher number.
Mr. CFO, if I may ask a clarifying question. When it comes to 98 versus $1.10 or $1.09, should it be, or $1.11, when you get to that $1.11 rate, does that not only restore services, but do something extra for Center 50 Plus and parks? Or is it new things for the library and still maintaining Center 50 Plus and parks?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think the not great answer is it depends. So the levy difference, you are talking about additional revenue to offset the cost of services. In this case, $15.7 million at $1.10, a little bit less if it's $1.09, a little more if it's $1.11. So the total cost of the services are 15.1. So in this case, you would cover the cost in the short term. In the out term, if you see that right number, $18.1 million, going back to that $1.10, 18.6. So there is some potential additional dollars there that could be directed at additional enhancements. I will say that these are estimates. So we set the rate, and the county gives us revenue based on that rate after they certify the tax rolls. So I wouldn't want to get too hung up down to the individual tens of thousands of dollars. But there is some potential there. If you dedicated the revenue to those services, it would have to be spent on those services. It wouldn't necessarily have to be on the library or Center 50 Plus or parks. It would just have to be for one of those.
And a follow-up to that, if for a further clarification for those who might not know, when you say per thousand, what does that mean?
Yeah, so on this slide, on the right, the annual household impact. So this is taking that, for an example, that 98 cents and multiplying it for each $1,000 of assessed value for your property. So in October, you get your tax bill from the county. You look for your property. There's going to be two numbers. There's going to be an assessed value and there's going to be a real market value. Taxes are based on the assessed value. So you'll take that, and if you had, your assessed value is 200,000, that's 200 times that 98 cents is the rate you would pay annually.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Matthews.
I had a question about that How to Salem Compare slide number 12, I think it was, one with the ratios. Perfect. So I want to make sure I understand it well. So I'm showing here, like if we look at our staff, 39.5 FTEs, and then we're showing the main library hours of 38, and then we have obviously our West Salem branch, I think at 10 hours currently a month, a week. So that puts us about 48 hours of actual operation with our 39.5 employees. Is that right? Do we know, I'm seeing some of these other libraries have obviously branches as well, but I think that all the staff estimates are based on entire, both main libraries and branch libraries. Is that right?
The information on this table is just the main library hours.
Okay.
We didn't get into breaking it out into all the branches and all that. We just wanted to have a straight comparison to say this is how many hours we're operating our main library branches. There are some nuances to that information, yes.
Right. Because I think it would be helpful for me if, and obviously it won't happen right now, but at least in the coming week or so, if I could get the same report, but with the number of branches with their hours added into the overall library, because the staff estimate we're utilizing, just like us for our 39.5, they're operating our main library and a branch. It's the same thing for the other staff in the other communities. They're operating a main library and branches. So
Yeah, happy to do that.
yeah.
Yes, Councillor Tigan.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to build on that request a little bit. I think when Councillor Brown was talking about a part of our orientation session, we were able to take a very nice tour of the library. And I think the things that we heard from the library staff are the things that you've said tonight, and the things we've heard from the community is that the number one thing that people want for the library is for the doors to be open more. And I look at this slide on, on page 10, talking about the library services, and I'm just curious, and I don't think I haven't given you enough warning for you to give us an answer tonight, but when we talk about main library hours, I have a hard time understanding what the trade-off is between all of the services that we provide versus what goes into these that if we were prioritizing hours open more than anything, we would lose some of these services, but we would have more open hours at the library. I get the sense that the robust staff numbers for these other libraries are probably doing something other than main library hours, right? They have probably many more programs than we do. But I think our community wants the library open even more than 53 hours. And if we're going to ask them for another $1.2 million a year, I think we should do even more analysis about what it would take to take the money that would come from this levy and go beyond 53 hours, even if it came at the cost of some of the community services. I don't know if that's a possible trade-off, because I don't know enough whether those are actual like pieces on the chessboard you can move around. But we really heard from a lot of members of public that what they want more than anything from the library is the doors to be open. And so I recognize those numbers are really difficult, but I feel like it's something we should stretch if we're going to ask the public for more funds.
If I may, Mayor, thank you for those questions and that comment. And yes, generally I would say we could further analyze that, and if we wanted to say that the open operational hours are the main priority, and we want to just focus on that, we could draft some scenarios that looked at that use of current and anticipated if we were going to ask for an enhancement of the service level. The hours beyond what we've included tonight would be, to a certain extent, would be at the expense of some of those other services and programs. So, and I think you've said that. So we'd be happy to look at some scenarios that examine that option. We have focused our effort historically on trying to be a full service library. Hours are a big part of that, but also all the services, and that particular slide that you were referencing shows all the different things that we do. So we definitely could look at scenarios that would expand hours even further, but we would have to do that with the understanding that it would be at the expense of some of those other things. And that's just part of the conversation. So tonight we wanted to keep it high level, but we'll be happy to provide that information.
Thank you.
Councillor Gwynn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my concern, if you want to call it that, I love the library too, and I thought this was a livability levy that included Center 50 Plus and parks, and I haven't heard anyone say anything about those. So I guess that's my question, because it seems like, especially Center 50 Plus, their budget is much, much smaller, and I just don't want to see them lose any operating capital, so.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I can start, and then Scott can take over if needed. So this maintains, and I think we brushed by it probably, maintains the current service level for Center 50 Plus, parks maintenance, and parks and parks, recreation. So everything that's currently funded, the same staffing would continue for this 5-year period, funded with the levy.
Yes, Councilor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Mr. CFO, I want to go back to something else, and it follows what Councilor Gwynn is referring to, at least I hope it does. So we've gotten a lot of responses about the community wanting a livability levy. And I would say, even with the emails that we've all received, I would say that that's a small portion, right? When we think about the 177,000 folks, if we receive, let's say, 250 emails, that's a small number compared to the thousands of others that have yet to hear from them. So in the presentation on, what is it? I think it's slide 4, the polling results, we still have a bigger issue. The bigger issue is we still have the community that is saying there's another side to this equation. The other side to this equation is, why are we not going to include in a particular levy more police officers and also with FD? And so we have tension here, right? Because we're not just looking at one levy. According to the research that you provided us, you said, although a majority of voters oppose all levy options, they prioritize a public safety levy over a community livability levy. So I think that's worthy of a conversation for us to have, because it's, on one hand, we can hear what the voters are saying, but we can't excuse the others because data has already showed us that they don't want a livability, they want the opposite. So I think it's better to put that big old elephant in the middle so we can figure out how to unpack it.
I think I'll defer to the city manager for this one.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Brown and Josh. We consider that very closely in our staff discussions about how to move this forward, and in our discussions with City Council last year. Why did we end up choosing to go with the community services, the livability levy? It's because, one, I don't think that funding public safety with a levy and going out to the community every 4 years is the best way to fund essential public safety services. I don't want to start there. I think that we have a community that's expressed a very strong interest in supporting a community services levy. I'm not sure that we have that same community body that's willing to carry a public safety levy forward to the community and do the campaigning that's necessary. So I think that's also an element for us to consider. But most importantly for me, as we were considering what to advance here, it was the notion that I don't want to fund public safety with a levy. I think there are many other options for us to consider as we consider how we move forward with funding our public safety functions on a permanent basis. There's the operation fee, there's a franchise fee, there's a capital district, there's EMS funds, and there's charges for dispatch. And then there's our EMS service, our new medical transport service. And all of those have a potential to generate revenue that can be used for furthering and protecting our public safety function. And I would say that we would focus on those and use the community services or the livability levy for those services.
Okay, I understand that, Mr. City Manager. I think my concern would be when we went on that tour and at the library, and Bridget, I think Bridget is here. Yeah, there she is. So one of the things that she shared with us was there have been incidents to where they've had to call the police. So I find that interesting that on one hand, we still have some revenue that could support the police, but there's no guarantee that we won't have to cut them. But when the library needs any kind of support when it comes to public safety, they only have one entity to call. And so my thing is, how do we protect that entity at the same time of taking care of the folks who want a library? Am I making sense?
Yes, I mean, certainly you're making sense. I think the promise of shifting support for these livability functions is that they then take pressure off of the general fund. And what's remaining in the general fund can be focused on fire and police and emergency response and other general fund functions. So I think that's part of the, shall I say, gift given to us by the last council, is by focusing on this and offering the voters a choice to positively fund it, it also leaves the remaining part of the general fund back for fire and police. And if I can add just one more thing, you know, I think our poll, as good as it was and statistically valid, but it suffers from the same problem that our emails do, which is just a representation, statistically valid representation, if the pollsters are listening, sorry, but it is just but a representation of our voters. And if I've learned anything as a volunteer public servant over the last few years, it's just how much our voters matter. You know, they really do, and we need to listen to them every chance we get. And they gave us a chance in November when they voted for the Chemeketa bond. Now, that didn't pass. But if you break apart the Salem portion of that vote, it did. 37,500 and change people voted for the Chemeketa bond, and 35,000 people in Salem voted against it. So that, to me, is the last indication we have from our voters, it was a vote, about their interest in using the bond authority to support institutions of education and livability. And to me, that's an important signal, and I don't think we should ignore it.
Well, if I may add, anecdotally and 100% true, sitting in the mayor's office across the way there with the city manager and others, last week suddenly in the courtyard of the library, a shopping cart went up in flames. And it had been parked next to the library door, and someone came out, thought fast, and pushed it away from the door, which who knows what kind of damage that saved, but thank you to whoever did that. And library staff handled that beautifully, but again, to your point, I consider public safety to be an issue of livability as well. So it's all in there, and I thank you, Councillor Teigen, for your comments. Yeah. Anyone else at this point? Yes, Councillor Nordyke.
Sure thing. Libraries prevent crime. Libraries reduce crime. So do access to clean parks. And so does Center 50 Plus. When you drill down and look at the social determinants of health, we all have a question before us: what kind of city do we want to live in? So if it were up to me and only me, would I vote for this to create this? Sure. But it's not. It's up to a lot of voters. So I believe we need to choose the amount that is most likely to pass. And psychologically, there is a big difference between 98 cents and $1, let alone $1.10. This is the first time we're bringing this levy. This is an opportunity to prove ourselves and demonstrate to the public that if they pass this measure, and I believe our chances are improving every single day based on the people who are here in attendance, the ones who are signing up in droves, the ones who are talking to their neighbors, the people who are prepared to actually vote in May, which people almost never do. The voter turnout is terrible in May. For all those reasons, I think we need to set this round up for success. And I really appreciate the comments from everybody. Among other things, how we phrase this ballot title measure is of the utmost importance because we are asking people to trust us, right? And there's a big difference between current service levels, staffing levels, pay increases. There's all kinds of things that can happen, right? So how we phrase that ballot title is of the utmost importance. We need to offer a clear choice to the voters. And to me, we will boost our odds of success if we keep it under $1. I really do. I used to work retail. I worked at Ranch Records in downtown Salem. And that successful proprietor, he ran Ranch Records, Kit Close ran Ranch Records for 38 years. And it was a successful business in part because he was extremely thoughtful about how he priced his selection of vinyl and then compact discs and so on. So we all bring our lived experiences to the table. I knew one of these days my hippy-dippy boho lifestyle ranch record, upbringing was gonna come handy, and sure enough it did. So I would love to fully fund all of these things. I don't feel that we're there yet. I really feel 98 cents has a much better chance psychologically for passing with the voters. And that's what I care about. And if this levy passes, there will always be opportunities the next cycle for us to show the community, we said we would do this with your money. This is what we've done with your money. These are the hours that we're now open for business. And we're now ready to come back to you. We're introducing a brand new, exotic, completely foreign concept to the people of Salem. They've never been asked to do this before. But the city is changing. Years ago, no one cared about homeless people or expected the city to play a role in it. Nobody cared. Everyone ignored them. No one expected the city to spend a dime doing anything other than policing homeless people. That has changed too. Now when I talk to my voters, they're like, what are you doing to address homelessness? They have made it clear this is now our responsibility. Our shared responsibility, I like to remind them, we're not the only people who receive taxpayer dollars who can move the needle, but it is still partially ours. So this is a brand new, newfangled, virgin concept, and we need to be gentle. So I think for those reasons, how we go about doing this is of the utmost importance. Communication, 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 but keep that bond measure, that levy number low would be my recommendation.
Councillor Tigan.
Thank you, Councillor Nordyke. I'm curious if we go from the 110 number to the 98 cent number, that's like a $1.5 million gap, a delta. So are you suggesting, I think one of the things the city staff needs from us tonight is a consensus on what gets included in the measure. So are you suggesting we just ask for less and include in the ballot measure that we would be enhancing library services, like we'll find the $1.2 million from somewhere else? Or are you suggesting that we cut the $1.5 million a year from the ballot cost and then also cut the promise of further enhancements of library services? I'm just like, for the question of the team tonight of like, what are we going to put on this ballot measure? I think that's operative.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. I think that's a great question, and I think that should be a team decision. Honestly, I think that we need to see what we can fit within that number. If it means that we would have to forego some restoration, I am okay with that, because again, my goal is to get this thing passed, and that means it's not going to be everything I want. I want us to have the best library in the state. That's what I would like, right? Instead of whatever we've got, which is doing the best with an extremely limited budget. We do our very best with that, but it's just embarrassing seeing how low our hours are compared to all those other cities. It's absolutely embarrassing. So I want to hear from folks on that. I would be curious to know to what extent that impacts the proponents' desire to go out and campaign for this, because that's a factor too. You know, you need to really stoke the enthusiasm and the energy. Anytime you're running a political campaign, and I've been involved with a lot of them, if you feel lukewarm about the concept, that translates into how you talk to voters. And your support for the candidate or cause needs to be genuine and fervent. And so those are the things that I'm up for listening and interested in hearing what you all have to say and hearing from other folks. So sorry to kind of punt on that one, Councilor.
No, I'm going to follow. Can I follow? So I think there's some tension that's still here that we have to unpack because, for example, I live in Ward 5, and the northeast part of Ward 5, or even throughout Ward 5, there are lots of pockets of poverty. And so when you consider that some people are right at or beneath the poverty line, 98 cent, 99 cent, whatever you want to do, that could still be a lot for some people that are at that level. And I would also say that when you look at where people travel from the farthest part of Ward 5 to here, to the library, it'll take a good 22 to 25 minutes just for someone to come from that part of the city to this library downtown. So now you have to ask yourself, for those parents that are out there, parents, single moms, grandparents, how many of them actually utilize our library? And that's not a question, Bridget, you have to answer. I'm not asking you. But I think it's a fair question we have to ask ourselves. When we think about the people who travel and use the library services, primarily where are they coming from? So I think we got to put that into the space. I also think we got to put it into the space that when we think about the public safety and the livability levy, I think we got to find some way to have some sort of healthy compromise, because right now I don't think we have one. For example, let's say we do all of this work and the city manager, we're going around from ward to ward, having town halls and, beating on doors and getting everybody's opinion. And we got people wearing buttons and T-shirts and banners, all that good stuff. We do all of that work. And you know what Brown's going to say next? I'm going to say, and suppose the voters come back and say no. If they say no to all that good work that we've done, I think we need some type of contingency plan in place, Madam Mayor, for the just in case. Because I don't want to get us too excited and we're just out there, we're doing this all, and then we lose, and we lose badly. What's our plan? And so I don't know much to see if we have a plan, but I think we got to live in that tension because we need a backup plan. Because if they say no, it just doesn't impact Madam Mayor, it impacts all of us. And we just got into these seats.
Thank
Dr.
you,
Brown,
Councilor.
go ahead, Madam Mayor.
You respond to that, and then the city manager has a comment.
Well, our backup plan is called the fiscal year 2026 budget. I mean, it isn't the backup plan. It's the plan. The public, and we don't have a full understanding of what that picture is, but by the time we decide for this to go on the ballot, and by the time that budget is revealed to the public, they are going to have a clear choice to make. Either pass the levy and restore the services, or don't pass the levy and we'll pass a 2026 budget. That balances it. That's the option both the voters and us will face.
Right, and I would say, and those are major cuts. And correct me if I'm wrong, the backup plan we passed in
Key
the budget.
talking point.
Right?
Yes.
It would be major cuts.
It would be $14 million in reductions to our general fund services. That would mean impacts to everything that is funded by the general fund.
Okay, perfect. I think that needs to sit for a minute. Because what the city manager is saying, if the voters say no to this, we still have a $14 million deficit, which means, you can tell me if I'm wrong, which means we still have to cut across the board. It will still impact public safety, which means chief Somebody's going to lose something. No entity or no department comes out of this scot-free. Someone's going to lose their job or jobs. And I'll be quiet.
Certainly at $14 million, that's like 8% of the general fund. So our general fund dollars generally translate into employees. And an 8% reduction in employees across the board is impactful. It's huge. It'll be 50 to 60 employees from the general fund.
Councilor Nishioka?
Thank you. That's why this is a livability levy all the way around.
Councilor Matthews?
I don't mean to switch gears at all, but I noticed in the packet here and in the slides, so originally our estimates were around, I think, $300,000 it was going to cost us to put this on the ballot. Now I think it's reduced down to about $35,000. And so that's obviously a much smaller number, much more palatable. What fund will that come out of? How is that actually getting paid?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And you might have noted in your testimony today, and if you didn't have a chance, it's not a problem. The Library Advisory Board met a couple last week, and they actually control one of our trust and agency funds that contains library donations that are available to be used for library purposes with the Library Advisory Board's recommendation. I believe the essence of their recommendation from their board, and they submitted as testimony, was that they could offset direct library expenses to free up to $50,000 of general fund dollars to pay for the election costs. So not paying for the direct election costs, but freeing up general fund dollars to do that.
Councilor Matthews?
Yeah, that's great, and I did see that, and so that's why I asked. But kind of my next question in line with that kind of being the case, it makes it very hard not to support, is the reality. I mean, it's not a burden to the city's budget. It's very hard not to support something that's not a burden to the city's budget when we're in obviously a fiscal issue. That said, I think the part that for me is the most challenging is I'm not fully convinced on the enhancement of services. I'm very convinced on the idea that we need something that at least maintains what we have. And so I'd be interested to see kind of what those both options look like coming back. Does that make sense? What are, and to Councilor Tigan's point a little earlier, in the knowing that the operations seem to be the most common thing I'm hearing as well, and that's our primary focus, what does a current budget situation look like if we were to expand operations but ultimately end up reducing programming, I'm sure, and then also with an enhancement, what does that look like? So I'd be interested to see both of those, and yeah, I think that's what I got.
I'm going to call next on Councilor Varney. She's online.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hoy. I wanted to say this has been a really great discussion, first of all. I wanted to say about the survey and the public safety levy. I agree that we should not have a public safety levy just because public safety is so much, I mean, it's such a high priority for me, for everybody, that we shouldn't have the ups and downs of a cycle having to pass it every 5 years. I don't think that's right for our community. And although that was the preference on the survey, the question was not asked that, or the information wasn't there, that this would create a lot of risk and uncertainty. And I think that would have tied into it a lot. In terms of the rate that we're looking at, the 98 cents, from my understanding, per thousand, would be just to maintain current services. And I think we've had lots and lots of emails, testimony that folks want to see increased services. So if you look at the cost, let's see, in the table for the current, the household impact, if it's $229 for the 98 cents, you know, on the average household, I think that's $234,000 assessed value. So if it's 98 cents for or $229, and then it's I'm trying to remember what it is. Anyway, for the 110, it's only $38 more. I'm looking at my notes, which is about $3 a month. So I think the question to ask the voters is, do you want what we have currently, or do you want the enhanced services that it cost you $3 more a month? I mean, I think when you look at it that way, I think a lot of people might be willing to support the 110 if we messaged it that way. In terms of my support of what we're looking at this evening, a local option levy was one of the key recommendations by the task force. And also, it's very evident that a majority of, at least from our public comments, they want this ballot measure on the ballot. I'm especially appreciative that the cost has been reduced, and now it sounds like there may be no cost to us because of the library trust fund. Well, you can verify that in a minute, but that was one of the things I was pushing back against in November. And boy, if the cost has been reduced and the community wants this on the ballot, the majority of the Salem residents are asking for it, then I think they should have a chance to do so. I mean, that's my opinion. But in terms of the rate, that will be a discussion that I think we're going to have to continue to have. Anyway, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Brown?
I have a question. So I'm going to follow Councilor's comments, Councilor Varney. On the ballot, can we put two different options? Can we put a 98-cent version option and then a $1.10 version option? Mr. City Attorney?
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. We could have two ballot measures and one or the other. So if one passes, if they both passed, only one would go into effect, and if one passes, the other fails.
Well, I think that's a golden idea, right? People are like, no, Dr. Brown, that's not a good idea. Well, the reason I ask is because, and I agree with Councilor Warren, we give it back to the voters. We hear them, we heard them, we want to give them the option. A part of me says, it's almost like a multiple choice, right? Okay, we'll just put all these on there, and then you decide whatever you want. And I'm only saying that with a little bit of humor, because this is serious business. And so sometimes to kind of take the bite out of this, we got to loosen up the air and just make sure that we can communicate. But I do think it's a possibility, only because we have to find a way to make sure that we hear every single voter. And I agree with what Councilor Nordyke said. We all know that in May, we do not get a huge percentage of voters to turn out to vote. We just don't. I mean, coming from Ward 5, I can tell you less than 2% actually voted. And so it's not a lot of people that are going to vote. Now, they may turn around and show up in just bandwagons and just everybody is going to vote. Who knows what could happen? I just think we just got to find a way to give more than one option.
Yes, Councilor Matthews.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think with the more than one option, I can almost guarantee the lower one's going to be the more likely one. I've never gone into a store and been like, I'll take the more expensive item. So that's just my guess.
Yes, Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I have asked over and over again, could we have a pick list? Could we say, oh, I'm for the parks, I'm for this, I'm for that? And from what I understand, it's really not, I guess it's called an appraisal list, or I'm not sure, there's an appraisal election or something. But what happens is, if people don't understand that, it can get confusing. And I think offering two could get confusing. And part of the reason that I like, and I believe voters like levies, is it's clear language, they know exactly what their money's going for, and they know the length of term. They know and that at that end of that time, if council says, let's do it again, then they'll again no, or else they'll say, hey, we didn't get what we wanted, or we aren't willing to spend that money anymore, so they'd vote against it. So a levy for this is the perfect way to ask. And as I said earlier, that by asking for this, if it passes, that supports the general fund, or at least gives it the breathing room so that we don't need to fire other departments. And so that was to my expression that it is a livability levy because it is allowing us to support all things if it passes. The trick, of course, is figuring out at what level. What are people willing to say, this is okay? And I would prefer to see the bigger ask that covers the things that we are hearing they want, which is increased hours, enhanced hours, whether that be enhanced services or programs, we don't know yet, but Center 50, Parks and Recs are really important to me. And I would really like to see it fully funded instead of us having to supplement the language of the levy and providing that with funds 2 and 3 years from now. I'm okay with $1.09, but I feel that I'd like the voters to give us an opportunity to provide what I am hearing, which is increased hours and services as described up here with Parks, Recreation, Center 50. So it would be remiss of us not to let the voters have an option because they have all worked so hard on this, helping fund the ballot and giving them the option it would be wrong if we didn't. And I just feel that it would be better to do it at the higher amount, $1.09, $1.05. But I do understand, in fact, I think when I was discussing this with somebody else, I was saying, 99 cents, it sounds good. It's like, oh, sure, 99 cents. It doesn't feel quite like $1. But at the same time, I'm concerned about that extra million year after year that we wouldn't be getting. Thank you.
And Councilor Nishioka, I would agree with you. I would agree that it's the enhancements. It's the enhancements because we had asked ourselves exactly what are we enhancing? Are we enhancing more staff? Are we enhancing more services that the library provides? Enhancements for Center 50 Plus. What are we going to enhance there, right? If we were to do things in the park, well, obviously I would think that if we're going to enhance the park, that would allow hopefully more staff or more things, kind of like changed within that particular park, more fun things to do for kids, like splash pads. There's a thought, right? So I think it's the enhancements. I think we got to find a way to unpack that so when people see that, when a voter sees that, they'll know exactly what we're talking about. Because if you just say enhancements, that could be anything.
Yes, Councilor Tigan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we should remind ourselves of the history and go back to the first slide that Josh showed us, or that the city manager showed us, is that we've cut $5 million from our budget over the last 2 years. And a big portion of that cut were library positions, right? So when we say enhancements, what we're really talking about is just going back 2 years to the service level that people had come to expect after the COVID shutdown. So I don't want people to think, it's going to be rainbows and unicorns at the library. It's literally just what it was 2 years ago. And what I'm hearing, I think what we're all hearing from the public is that really matters. So I believe it was Councilor Nordyke, the language of the ballot measure, right, in and of itself, whether we choose to describe restoring cuts as enhancements, I think is a choice we can make on the language, and it's something we should discuss. Because calling it enhancements is really, promising something we're not offering, and it's also, creating a perception that we're, spending money when we know we're in a really difficult position on things we can't afford.
Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you. Asking the voters to save the library is very different than asking the voters to increase the library budget. So again, that's one of the reasons why I think for this first levy, our first attempt at a levy, asking for more money right now above and beyond current service level will not play as well with our prospective voters as saying, we're here to just keep our doors open. And again, that's not what I want. I would love to have a universe where we have the most library hours in the state and we have multiple branches. That's not what I personally want, but I'm also a very brutal realist. And again, I think we have to be very careful about asking for too much our very first time that we attempt this. We wanted to pass, right? Anyway.
Further questions? Concerns? Oh, I see her. Look at that. Councillor Varney, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hoy. Well, I wanted to say passage of this levy is not just save the library. It's save our parks and save Center 50 Plus. And if we don't pass anything, we're going to lose a heck of a lot in terms of livability. And so whether it's 98 cents or 109 cents, I think the message is, if you want these services that you've enjoyed for all these years, this needs to pass. And so that's the way I feel about it, whatever we decide on for a rate.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I personally think it's important to acknowledge the fact that the entities included in this levy, the Center 50 Plus, the parks, and the library, are all working together to make this happen for the people. And that, I've never seen that before. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge the willingness to jump in, to pay for the levy to go onto the ballot. That's pretty, I don't know how unique that is, but I've never heard of that. And so I think we have a special opportunity here. Determining the value is important also. I want more for everyone, and I also want it to pass. So, anybody else? Yes.
I keep forgetting to mention, our city attorney mentioned earlier that while you don't have to, you can put these funds in a special account for transparency's sake, and I really like that idea. I think that would be excellent. I'd like to have a dashboard and a tracker on our website that shows people exactly how we're doing, because we know you library nerds out there are all about the data, and I think that would be great. Also, Councillor Brown, you mentioned, how much usage is there by Ward 5 of our library. It's possible that, every time I use my library card, it shows me, Vanessa Nordike, checking out a book. Spoiler alert, it's mostly cooking and sci-fi. But you could probably pull data, not by name, of course, but just by where their address is located in the city. You could find out how many people in Ward 5 or Ward 2 or Ward 7 are using the library. You could find that out in a way that maintains confidentiality. You wouldn't give out names or addresses or anything like that, but you could definitely get a sense of that if we wished. Those are just the two little housekeeping matters I want to make sure I mention.
If I might follow up on that, is that possible? I'm not sure if that's a question for Scott or Bridget. Is it?
Bridget, would you mind coming up to the podium and helping us understand that question a little bit better?
Good evening, Bridget Esqueda, City Librarian. It is possible to do kind of like an address check, like a zip code search. We would have to work with our cooperative to get that information. But I think it is possible to see how many people in a certain zip code have an active library card. Yeah.
Thank you, Bridget. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So with that particular research, we can do it. Obviously, it sounds like we can. I think I would be remiss if I didn't say this part, and I think I've shared this with some of my fellow councilors. So in Ward 5, some of the constituents who did not like the payroll tax, obviously they said no to it. In that same breath, they also said that my family, we don't use the library. Now, we may not want to hear that in this setting, but I think this is the best place to actually bring it up. And I just kind of went further. I said, well, what do you mean you don't use the library? And they said, as a family, we don't travel downtown to use the library. And I said, well, what do you do? How do you get your books? And one response I got, one parent told me, well, my kids go to school, and I encourage them to use the library within the school. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a great option. Another parent told me, rather than going to the library, they do their best to, go online, do their own research. Obviously, Google can give you a whole lot of good things to look at. And so I'm putting that into the space because I just want to make sure that we represent every single voter that's out there. Because obviously there are going to be some that just say no across the board. And I don't know what it's going to take to convince that no voter, because those are the ones we really have to shift. Because if they're in the no column, it's going to take a lot of work to get them to even think about saying yes to this. And so when I think about, people in Ward 5, my concern goes back, one, how much is this going to cost them? And I don't really know the answer to that because everyone's in a different financial bracket. And just making sure that I hear and respect all their voices. So I just want to put that in space.
Yes, Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you. The next question you should ask, do you use the parks? Do you use Center 50 Plus? Because they're also included in this.
Councilor Matthews.
Well, I just wanted to point out, as kind of some of the other councilors have too, we've talked a lot about the library tonight, but there are two other pieces to this levy. And as part of that, I was asking a few questions today. And so, Marilyn, I don't know if you have a second to come up, but I wanted to ask, I'd asked today, how many volunteer hours are there at Center 50 Plus? And the number came back was pretty staggering, but I'll let her say what it was, so.
I'm Marilyn Daly, and I'm the director at Center 50 Plus, and I love that question because that's the backbone of Center 50 Plus is our volunteers. This year, our volunteers, 465 volunteers, gave 105,000 hours of service. That equates to a little over $2.5 million.
And so to me, when I saw that today, I thought that was pretty staggering. And you can just assume that if there's that much passion behind Center 50 Plus, as much as we've talked about the library tonight, that has to be a driving factor in this as well. And so that was also very impactful to me. The other thing that was impactful, kind of back to the library, I was telling my son tonight I was going to miss his basketball practice, and that I was telling him what we were going to do here tonight, and I wasn't super excited about it, in all truthfulness. I thought it was going to be, a little tensious, but it wasn't. So he immediately was like, you got to fund the library, Dad. You have to. They're at the library every weekend. He also had some other options. He felt like we should allow dogs. He felt like at night we should do laser tag. So there's some options he's also proposing. So keep it in mind, everyone. But it is true. There's big community support behind it right now, and there's people that really appreciate these services and these assets to our community. So,
Councilor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. And I do want to follow Councilor Matthews in regards to Center 50 Plus, which is in Ward 5. When we went to visit, where did Marilyn go? When we went to visit her and her staff and gave us a tour, and I think we were in there, a couple hours maybe? Whenever Matthews and I go someplace, we're always there for too long because people are ready for us to leave. So we were in Center 50 Plus, and she shared a lot about the hours. And we went around to every single room that was being occupied, whether they were, exercising or whether they were actually, there's a certain class that they do for some of our senior citizens that may be struggling with dementia, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so there's a whole lot that Center 50 Plus does. So my encouragement would be that when we decide to go from ward to ward and we're out there talking about, this particular levy, I hope that we could put as much emphasis into the discussion about Center 50 Plus as we do about the library. Because I would be remiss if I had to see that particular facility not offer all the services it currently does go away. That would just be heartbreaking because there's nothing else to replace that. And then when I think about the parks, I think that's another conversation sometimes all by itself. But I agree with Councilor Nishioka that people do use our parks. They use them every single day. And so I think it's a conversation we just got to make sure that we have good language to package it well. And when we are on the road, going from ward to ward, I just make sure that we can hit all of those so that every voter who may be in the no column, we can convince them to be in the maybe to the yes column.
Yes, Councillor Gwynn.
Well, I'm just curious, and perhaps this is for the city attorney, is there a way for us to include language to basically say our public safety will be safe, that we're not going to cut police and fire if the livability levy is passed?
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So as part of the ballot title itself and the different parts of the ballot title, there's very limited amount of words. There is part of that, that's the explanatory statement where you can get into more discussion of what it would do. And as part of that explanatory statement, you could say that, you know, this will supplement the library's budget to provide these restored services and will preserve general funds that can be used for public safety. So there's additional detail you can put in there to make that more clear. So yes.
I want to say thank you, Councillor Gwynn. That was going to be my follow-up as well, because I think for the community as a whole, we need to, in this process, show efforts to create public safety for those who don't feel safe. So I think it has to come in partnership, even though they're separate. We're talking about a levy versus general fund, not versus, but in connection, and make sure that we kind of cover both worlds or all those worlds with our efforts. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to respond to Councilor Gwynn's comment, it is much easier to make that commitment at $1.10 than it is at 98 cents. At 98 cents, that gets harder to do. Then we're really talking about all those other things that I mentioned, the operations fee, franchise fee, EMS fees, our friends from the Capitol campus, and all of that has to come into play in order to balance that equation. 110 doesn't resolve all of our problems, and some of those other resources may have to come into play, but it makes it easier.
Councillor Gwynn.
I also wanted to just say I agree with Councillor Nordyke that I think it would be important for the transparency to have those funds set aside and designated specifically for whatever it's going to be. So,
a question for Josh, maybe. Is there a cost associated with that movement, like creating its own space?
Very, very little cost. So we would just create another fund. So right now we have 24, we would have 25, and it wouldn't be a significant issue to account for it separately. And that was included, if you looked in the staff report, there were a couple accountability measures that we listed there. And that was certainly one of them that we could do fairly easily.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let me ask the city attorney how we proceed, or would you like to make comment?
Certainly, thank you, Mayor. Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So you've got some options tonight. We were hoping to get clear direction from council on how much, what it would be used for, and what services. We do have a little bit of time here. The council does need to make a decision on a resolution in the month of February. You've got 2 meetings, February 10th, February 24th. If council feels you have a consensus now, the mayor has some draft motions that I put together quickly that she can make. And to clarify, this is a work session, but you can vote on motions here. The final policy decision would come at an open council meeting. But if you wanted to direct staff to prepare a resolution with a measure on it that tells us what this money would be used for, how much money you would generate, and the length of the measure at 5 years, we can do that tonight. If you have unanswered questions, we could always come back on February 10th and where you could then direct us to do that, and we would come back on February 24th. That would be the drop dead date, so to speak, where we would, that February 24th date, you would have to make a final decision to actually adopt that resolution.
I do believe we did have some questions put forth that staff, you're coming forth back with answers to those, is that right? And you need time to do that, is that correct?
Yeah, we plan to follow up with you, and I guess that would be with your direction if you wanted us to bring that back at another session, or how you'd want to do that. But yes, we're prepared to bring back the information requested.
Councillor Tigan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I want to clarify City Attorney Atchison's comments. So you're saying you have a motion for us to make the decision tonight, or to give the city clear direction on what to bring to the next council meeting?
So tonight, council doesn't have to, but can consider a motion to direct staff to bring back at a February meeting, 10th to the 24th, a resolution referring a local option levy to the voters that would specify the rate and specify the uses. You can do that tonight, or you still have time if you wanted to delay that decision to February 10th. But that would really be your last chance to tell us to do that, and then we come back on the 24th and you do it.
Councillor Matthews?
So to piggyback on that, so we wouldn't need to tell you tonight or tell the city or give any direction on exactly what number to come back with. Is that correct? You're just needing us to approve the idea of coming back with something?
When council adopts the resolution, which has to happen by February 24th, we need that rate. So you either tell us tonight or you tell us on February 10th.
Yes, Councillor Nishioka.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there would be a chance for us to hear at 98 or 99 cents with library without enhancement, Center 50 and Parks and Rec, to see if that protects public safety to the amount that we would need. And then a second option with being at $1.09 with restored services, Parks, Rec, and Center 50. So could we see two options? Basically, I'm asking, could we see that, and how that would affect either one of those three entities or all three of them by adjusting something at a lower rate, or if we were at the $1.09, if that would get us where we needed?
Is that question clear for you, Josh? And could you do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes, Councillor Brown.
Madam Mayor, just to follow up on that. So CFO, so since you can do that, that also means that you will have the language that'll say that we're not going to touch public safety, FD and PD?
I will not be drafting that language.
Thanks, Josh. I would not put that exact language in an explanatory statement. An absolute like that you cannot guarantee. So, you know, it would protect, it would preserve, but you can't just guarantee that we wouldn't touch another line of service like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Nordyke.
Thank you. I'm curious, I'm not sure if it's in the scenarios presented in the staff report, and I'm not saying I'm a big fan of it, but 98 cents funds current service levels for library, Center 50 Plus, and the parks, and it provides some restoration of library services, right? That's what the 98 cents would do. So what would it be if you omitted the restoration and just maintained current service levels? What would that price point be? And that might be one of the questions that requires you to come back another time.
If I'm understanding correctly, so basically what the 98-cent scenario would look like without restoration of services at the library.
No, I'd like to know what would it cost to just do current service levels, no restoration / enhancement. I assume it'd be less than 98 cents.
So with the current delta between the service level and the levy estimate, that 98 cents would still be appropriate for the current service level without the enhancement.
Councillor Nordyke, I see the question mark in your eyes? What?
Well, I mean, I just looking at the tables you presented, the restoration adds 1.2 million the first year, 1.2 the second year, and so on. So I figure that has to account for some of the 98 cents. That's why I'm not understanding it.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. So this levy scenario on this slide here, 98 cents per thousand. The levy revenue total 98 cents, $14 million going to 16.6. The total service cost is greater than that 98 cents. So that's why I was saying if you take out that 1.2 million to 1.35, 98 cents still gets you to cover the current total service cost without that enhancement.
Okay, thank you. And again, I just want to reiterate, I'm not a fan of keeping our hours as abysmally low as they currently are, but I also need to make sure I understand how the numbers add up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nordyke. I'm going to go to Councilor Varney.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hoy. I just wanted to mention, I understood Councilor Nishioka's request for information about what would be covered. I'd like to know the potential impacts to public safety at the two different rates. If that makes sense, if we can add that in.
If I may, we could speak generally to it. It's extremely challenging to project the future. So in the 5-year forecast, we project a certain deficit and some opportunities for revenue and potential savings, but those haven't come to fruition yet. So it's really difficult to say with any level of certainty what the savings might be, what those revenues might generate, and display those on the forecast. So we could speak very generally about it, but we couldn't say with any certainty what the specific impact might be.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah, Councilor Mudd.
So I have two questions. So one, back to kind of what Councilor Nordyke was saying, I want to make sure I understand this slide well on number 8, that if we were to go at just current service level, we would not see that difference. Ultimately, it would come out at essentially a net zero, approximately.
That is correct. I would say the 98 cents is still a reasonable levy rate, staying below that dollar amount. I wouldn't recommend lowering it.
Okay. And then kind of the other thing, and this kind of leaps off of what Councilor Brown and Councilor Varney just talked about with public safety, but you mentioned just a second ago, City Manager, that it would be easier at the $1.10 rate to be able to kind of make those assurances to the public that that public safety would not be impacted by this. But our proposal from the staff right now is for 98 cents. So I don't want to give the impression or imply something that's not true. So is the proposal of 98 cents imply that we likely will have cuts to public safety coming?
That is totally up to council and your willingness to put additional revenue into the system or to make cuts elsewhere.
Councilor Brown.
So Madam Mayor, I want to follow Councilor Matthews' comment. So if tonight's work session, if we're highlighting the wording that could go on the ballot in May, do we need to have another work session to come back to talk about public safety, of what that could look like on the opposite side?
City Manager had a comment, I believe.
We will have multiple workshops to talk about that question in the form of the Budget Committee and council deliberations around our 2026 budget. That will be the focus of our conversation, and it will be intense.
Councilor,
thank you.
Councilor Teigen.
Yeah, I'll pull out a quote I read in a book, since we're talking about libraries and stuff. The great Albert Einstein said, "The reason time exists is so everything doesn't happen at once." And I feel like tonight we're getting really close, in my mind, to, and maybe we need to hear from the city, what they need to bring to us on February 10th. But I think we have additional time in February to decide, even if we say, oh, bring us 109, we have time to make the decision at that meeting on February 10th to go down to 98 cents if that's what we deem prudent after hearing the information from the city. So I feel really good about where this conversation is going and how we've held it. I really just want to say that. And, but I also know, tonight's the night. We're not going to walk away we're not going to walk away tonight with the question on the ballot, right? We still have at least 1-2 sessions to make that choice.
Thank you, Councillor Tigan. I need to ask the city attorney a little question.
I don't want to step on the city manager's toes, but I'm not sure we have consensus on the rate. So I don't know that you're ready to adopt a motion tonight to direct us on February 10th to bring a resolution back with all that information. So at the council's discretion, if you want to have maybe a more centered discussion on what services to include, are we pretty centered on what services to include in the levy? And then if you want to have any further discussion on rate, that would be great tonight. If not, you can defer that to the 10th, and we're going to come back with a rate for you to look at, and then you can decide whether you want to do 2 measures, which sounds a little complicated for the voters, or if you want to go to a higher number than what staff is recommending.
Councillor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mr. Atchison. So just to make sure I'm understanding, you would like us to say, and I will go ahead and say what I want. I'd like to hear what it would be to have a livability levy for the library with restored hours, Center 50 Plus, and Parks and Rec, and then they'll come back with an amount. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, and I think with the clarification on the rate is whether you want the proposed levy to fully fund those services, which would be the 109 number thereabouts, or do you want to go with staff's proposal, which would be 98 cents to supplement those budgets, but still use some amount of general fund to pay for those restored services?
So I guess, so that's what staff would like as our pretty clear direction tonight. It sounds like, because, well, first off, I want to say thank you to everybody, all of the hard work that you have done to present this information. And I feel bad that we're flopping around trying to figure it out. But incredible work, thank you. And it sounds like it would be most helpful if we could provide that direction, whether we want restored hours or not. That's it. I think that's basically where we are.
If I can say one more thing, I think you haven't, to February 10th to figure that rate question out. So we don't need, unless you're ready to go with a rate, we don't need that answer tonight. So if you want us to come back at February 10th with a staff report that proposes something, we'll put a rate in there, but then council can decide whether that's appropriate, and we'll have the options for the direction that you've talked about tonight in that staff report. Then at the end of the meeting on the 10th, you'll provide us clear direction on all of those.
Thank you.
Councillor Gwynn.
So much information to absorb. I personally would like to wait until the 10th and come back, but I don't know how my colleagues feel.
Councillor Nordyke.
I too would like to wait until February 10. I would like to hear from my colleagues. I want to mull over all the great data that was shared with us tonight. I'd like to talk with some of the biggest supporters of the parks and Center 50 Plus and library to see how they feel about these things, because we will not be able to pass this levy alone. So I don't get the sense from my colleagues that we're ready to support a motion. I am inclined, that being said, I've said 98 cents many times tonight, so I'll say it one more time. I'm very interested, not bringing a motion, but I would be interested in seeing a levy for 98 cents and what exactly we get for that. And I just want to reiterate, you cannot promise that public safety will emerge from this unscathed. Anything can happen, like pandemics. which was a huge strain on public safety and first responders. You cannot make that promise. No one should be making that promise. It's just not possible. You need a crystal ball to say, nope, nope, we will never, ever, ever, ever touch that. Things happen. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tigan.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I'll just say my perspective is outcomes focused. And I know the number matters because it's, people are going to look at it and they're going to judge it by the number. But my main concern is what residents of the city will get for supporting it. And so to me, I hope when the city presents something to us on the 10th that we get to see a number associated with the outcome, which in my mind, I feel like we should be restoring the services that we provided 2 years ago before we went through this latest round of budget cuts. And I think the public knows we don't actually just get a lot of time to talk about substantive issues with one another, and we do it here in this. If it's 2 hours on a Tuesday, then that's the time we take. So I just want the fellow councilors to know what my position is, and I think we'll continue to have robust discussions about it as we move into February, but that's where I'm coming from tonight.
City Manager Staley.
Thank you, Mayor. So what I'm hearing this evening is that we are inclined to place a measure on the ballot in May. Yes, we are inclined to do that. That measure will be for Parks, Center 50, and for Library. And we are to determine whether or not there are enhancements or not. And we will come back to you on February 10th with a staff report that fleshes out what the options are to include enhancements or not include enhancements as we've defined them this evening.
I raised my own hand. I just want to make sure that we define enhancements maybe a little bit. So I can't remember who mentioned it, but I think that's important. So we know what we are saying when we use that word. Okay.
If we use it at all. If we use the word enhancements at all.
Noted. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? If there's no further discussion, I think we may be adjourned.